this is Jeffrey Milburn, and this is the Omni Art Salon number 288. It is a provocative conversation I had with David Young, musician and author of his newly released book, Channeling Harrison. Channeling Harrison is David's personal narrative about how he developed a very close relationship with the quiet Beatle, perhaps best known for his devotion to love, spirituality, and consciousness expansion for a better humanity. David describes a series of extraordinary synchronicities and inner and outer visitations and communications from this famous Beatle that have taken place in over just the last 4 years. These visitations and communications have coincided with some very important changes in David's personal and professional life that really cannot be explained in any other way than simply mystical and miraculous. The help that George Harrison has given to David in these 4 short years completely transformed David's experience of making music and art, and also represented a continuation of Harrison's work to bring greater awareness, love, and healing to humanity through music. Love has no boundaries, nor is it limited by time or space. As many of you already know, David is a Grammy-nominated musician with a prolific array of CDs that have sold in the millions worldwide, all without the support of any mainstream music corporation. In this way, David is something of an independent music hero, as his music continues to spread to all the corners of the planet, simply because it is so uplifting, healing, and beautiful. David's music is very familiar to thousands of massage therapists and spa owners because his music has been so effective in bringing the right vibrations into healing settings all over the planet. Described as the most beautiful music in the world, David's music has been used continuously in healing settings around the world for many years. The unique connection that George Harrison developed with David makes a really fascinating story, especially when considering that Harrison's own instantly recognizable music has dramatically impacted Western culture for almost 50 years in a similar fashion. For who can forget Here Comes the Sun or My Sweet Lord? In our extensive 2-part conversation, David details the growth of the cosmic relationship that developed between he and George Harrison, a relationship that arrived quite unexpectedly and without provocation on David's part, which makes it all the more intriguing. David's connection with George Harrison is an unfolding story of a brotherhood that stretches across lifetimes and is a personal testament to the multidimensional nature of our holographic universe and how it works in very practical ways. I think many of you will benefit from David sharing his personal experience, and perhaps you'll be inspired to pursue more deeply your love relationships with those in a body here in the physical world and those who have moved on to other dimensions as well. So, without further ado, the Omni Art Salon proudly presents Channeling George Harrison with David Young, Part 1. David, it's so great to have you back on the Omni Art Salon. It's been quite a while, and you've been busy, and you have this fascinating new book, Channeling Harrison. So I'm sure all my audience is fascinated to know, why George Harrison? What inspired you to write about George Harrison?
Well, I think it would be better for you to ask George what inspired him to contact me in 2010, because I didn't have a clue. I mean, I was a little bit too young to be a Beatles fan because I was born in 1961.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't believe in channeling at all because I thought anybody could just say anything and make up stuff, and, how could you prove any of it? And I was also afraid of ghosts since I had some bad experiences with ghosts when I was a kid. So, for those three reasons, I had no idea why he would be interested in contacting me at all.
In the beginning, but it's been now, 4 years of this these series of contacts have been going on, correct?
Yeah, in the beginning, it was like once every 2 months that something would happen, and it was bizarre. I mean, I completely was baffled by it. And 3 months into these experiences where I had three very, very unique, all things that were connected to George, I moved to Newtown, Pennsylvania, which is not far from New Hope, Pennsylvania, and I started dating this woman, and on my third date with her, she asked me what the highlight of my career was, and I said it was when Paul McCartney started his standing ovation for me. And then she asked me if I knew that George Harrison used to babysit her when she was a kid.
Ah.
And I had never been on a date where a woman said that to me. Have you ever been on a date where a woman said that to you?
No, but
yeah, it was my first time. Yeah.
But synchronicities are always very, I speak to a lot of people about the holographic universe, the nature of reality, the multiverse, this kind of thing. So I'm not ever surprised by synchronicities and connections because I see it over and over and over in different ways. So that's why I was fascinated by your connection to George Harrison because, like you've said, it sounds like he contacted you. He started the connection.
Yeah, he initiated it. I would have never initiated it. I didn't. I was in the dark for 3 years about this. These things, in the beginning, they were every, 2 months approximately, But once I started dating his stepdaughter, then it was it was picking up and, these things were happening every day while I dated his stepdaughter for 2 months. And then when that finally came to an end, because she was really not ready to start a relationship, and I had just ended a 9-year relationship, and before that a 7-year marriage. So, I mean, I didn't know. The whole dating scene just was I was so out of touch with it. I had never dated anybody who was what's called emotionally unavailable. And so after 2 months of this, because that's where she was at, because she had some pretty bad disappointments with men, a couple of years before I had met her. When that ended, I thought, well, this is going to be finished with George. I mean, I thought that the only reason why he was contacting me was because of her, I mean, that was my common sense would, connect those dots and say, well, yeah, I mean, if he was her stepdad as a kid, he wants her to be happy, and, we have a lot in common. We both had dark hair, dark eyes. We sang, we played guitar. We started out as lead guitar players in the rock bands we were in that other people sang in. And we eventually became songwriters, and we both got into meditation and yoga when we were in our early 20s. And once we got into spirituality, that really was the driving force in both of our lives. We both wrote songs that had a universal message to it, and kind of romantic guys,
Well,
so I thought he just wanted her to be happy. And so when the thing with her finally ended, after a really roller coaster ride, I thought that it was over. I just was so surprised that he just kept appearing to me. I mean, he appeared to me in my bedroom, he played guitar in my bedroom. I mean, have you ever had one of the Beatles play the guitar in your bedroom?
Now, was this visible to the naked eye, or was it an inner experience?
Well, it was, thank goodness, it was invisible to my physical eyes, because as I told you, I was afraid of ghosts. And George knew this, and if I would have seen a ghost pop up in my room with a guitar or without a guitar, I mean, I would have flipped out, So I could see where he was. I could hear where he was just to the right of my bed. I could hear what he was playing completely clear. I didn't even know that was possible for, a soul that's crossed over into the heavenly worlds to actually be able to play music that a person who is physically alive could actually hear. you know. But that wasn't the first time that happened. And I mean, he's a magical guy, you know.
Oh yeah.
I found out more and more about him, you know, as my relationship with him developed, and you know, spirituality was like the most important thing in his life, and he used the fame that he had from being one of the Beatles to advance spirituality in every way that he could. You know, you got to remember back then in the 60s, yoga was unheard of. The concept of self-realization was unheard of,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And he used everything that he could to really advance the knowledge and the possibility of us becoming self-realized beings and becoming spiritual people. He used his life to propel that concept into the world.
Has he spoken to you directly, either in the dream state or in, you know, these waking experiences, about why he wanted to connect with you, or has it just been more indirect?
No, it's in the beginning it was indirect. Like for the first 3 years, when I say indirect, it was indirect physically. I mean, he would appear to me in dreams and tell me things in dreams that would manifest in my life physically. It was kind of unique. It was either 2 days later or 2 weeks later. It was just this unique time thing. I noticed the pattern. That was one of the things about this experience. And to people who are listening, who are experiencing your own synchronicity, you look for a pattern in things. There could be a pattern of numbers, like the number 9 from the time this thing started. The number 9 was everywhere. It's been everywhere. There's 10 pages on the number 9 in book 2 that I'm writing right now. That was one of the patterns that was, you know, that was repeating.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I had a dream with him where he told me he liked to play tennis with soft grass behind him. And I thought I must have heard him wrong, because what in the world does that mean? You know? So I looked at him and I said, what are you trying to say? He said, I like to play tennis with soft grass behind me. He cracked up laughing and he disappeared right in front of me. 2 weeks later, Rolling Stone magazine came out, and there was a picture of him playing tennis with Bob Dylan, and there's this grass that's behind him in the picture. Underneath the picture, there are only 2 words that are in bold on the whole page. And those 2 words that are in bold are the words Forever Young. And my nickname that my close friends call me is David Forever Young, because I'm a lot younger than I am.
Do you think that perhaps you've been in other incarnations with George in a different role, maybe a brother or a wife or some kind of close connection?
Well, I'd rather think of him as a brother than a wife, you know.
Well, yeah. Well, if you were a woman's body, you probably wouldn't mind.
Well, you know, he has explained to me that we've been brothers, we've been closer than brothers, and that, you know, normally when people think about soulmates or twin flames, we normally think about that in a romantic way, like, you know, like a man-woman way.
Mm-hmm.
But he explained to me that we are like these twin flames, and he explained a couple of incarnations that we've had together. But it's been, you know, there's been so many lifetimes, he told me, that we've been connected in the same soul group. You know, that was one of the unique things that happened, because, you know, as I said, I didn't believe in channeling. This thing had been going on for 3 years. I never for 1 second thought, oh, gee, I could contact somebody who's a channeler and find out what this thing's all about. I wouldn't do that because I didn't believe in channeling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my belief system, that was not in it, you know. And so what happened is that I had this, he got me a publishing deal, which is, the whole story of that is in the book. I mean, it's a miracle. You know, you can call it synchronicity a miracle, if you want to call it. But, you know, with what I experienced with George, sometimes on a daily basis, are flat-out miracles. Because, I mean, for these things to happen, for him to be able to communicate in all the different ways that he communicates with me, I mean, they're miracles, So he had gotten this publishing deal, and I had this amazing experience because once the publishing deal was in place, the events the miracles he was placing in my life went from happening once a week or so to once a day or twice a day or 3 times a day. I didn't have enough time to type these things out. There were so many of them,
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, after I had this giant, I had a spiritual experience with him where I was in Hawaii. I really, really wanted to understand what this thing was all about because it's been going on for 3 years. I had a whole book of these experiences, these miracles, but I didn't know why he chose me, and I didn't know what it was all about. And so I was in Hawaii, and I went into meditation, and I was on a mission to get some answers, you know what I mean? Because that's a long time to be part of something and be clueless to why it's happening, And so he appeared to me as this energy. It was like standing in front of a waterfall with a little coffee cup and trying to catch the whole thing. I mean, it was like I was standing in front of a mountain of spiritual energy and strength. And the energy emanated this goodness that was like really nothing I had ever experienced in my life, And this experience lasted at least a half hour, I put all the details of it in my book. And so after that happened, it's like my whole spiritual awareness was opened up to just a wider scope of everything. And a couple of weeks later, I downloaded numerology without ever reading a book. I just knew all this connection between numbers. I'm sure you've seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind. I could see these numbers in ways that I'd never be able to see them before. Things that I had done in my life, like I had a year into the experience, I got the nudge to make a painting. Now, this is unique because I could never draw. I would never think of making a painting. I couldn't even make a stick figure, I was always natural at music, but, no way. I wouldn't ever think of making a painting. And so I paint this thing for 10 hours. I pick 4 colors, and I make a painting of gray triangles surrounded by burgundy, brown, and gold. Okay, 10 hours I painted this thing, 2 weeks after I finished this painting, which brought me a lot of happiness, because every time I would look at this painting, I would feel, it was almost like a mandala in a way. I felt this beautiful energy coming from this painting every time I looked at it. 2 weeks later, after I made the painting, my girlfriend at the time bought me a book on George's life, because this was right around the time of the 10-year passing of when he crossed over. We don't ever pass away; we cross over into the next realm.
Right.
And in this book, George was wearing. There was a picture of him wearing his favorite jacket that he had custom made for him that he wore at the after party of the concert for Bangladesh. And his jacket had a design of gray triangles surrounding burgundy, gold, and brown. The exact same 4 colors, with the pattern of gray triangles surrounded by the same 3 colors.
Great.
So these things really started to pick up then. And, then I was actually, over the last 6 months, I became friends with an incredible guy. He found me. Actually, George used this channeler in Canada. His name is Bob Murray, and he wrote these books called The Stars Still Shine. You can look up his website, The Stars Still Shine. And basically, he contacted me through this crazy, crazy coincidence, through a neighbor of the guy who was my publisher, who lived on a house on a dirt road that had 10 houses on this road, on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. And George used Bob Murray to contact a woman who lived 3 doors down from my publisher, a woman named Lori, who was editing some stuff for my publisher and editing some stuff for Bob Murray. And he used that to contact me. And because, as I said, I was in the dark with this stuff for 3 years. And so, now I talk, whenever I have something that I can't figure out on my own, because Bob Murray has been, he's been a channeler for, I don't know if it's 30 or 40 years, but he's a master at this stuff. So he helps, like, as a translator, so I can understand what George wants me to do and to help give me guidance to do whatever I'm doing in the best way I can.
Wow. So what is going on currently with George's communication with you now that you've started your book launch and, you've been talking about this publicly? Has it continued? Has it gotten more intensified? What's going on?
Well, it's gotten more intense, but it also has more humor because, George has a great sense of humor, and I guess all the Beatles like joking around a lot,
Mm-hmm.
But, it was unique because my book just came out on May 22nd. So that's a 522, and the number, like I was saying, the number 9 repeats everywhere. I didn't choose the date 522, but that's a 9. And so in December, George told me that he wanted me to start doing events in February. And I'm like, well, why do you want me to do events in February if the book doesn't come out until May? And he said, well, I think it would be good to get the ball rolling and get the stuff moving. So I contacted a friend of mine who is an agent in the Philadelphia and the New Jersey area. And I asked her to book some events starting in February. So the first event she books is February 9th. And then she books a total of 9 dates in the month of February. So 2 weeks before February 9th, before the first event, which was at the Pebble Hill Church in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour outside of Philadelphia, 2 weeks before the event, the agent calls me up, and she is all excited. And she says, did you know that February 9th, the night of that you're doing the event at Pebble Hill Church, did you know that this is the 50th anniversary of when the Beatles played on the Ed Sullivan Show?
Amazing.
And I said, no, I had no idea. And so, the week or so before this concert tour started, the whole world was talking about the Beatles because it was the 50th anniversary of when it happened. I got some advance books back on February 7th, which was 2 days before February 9th. On the day that I got those books back, that was the 50th anniversary of when the Beatles arrived at Kennedy Airport in New York. That's when they landed here.
Great.
And I grew up in Brooklyn, in Canarsie, Brooklyn, basically 15 minutes from Kennedy Airport. That was the closest airport to my house.
So it's constant. It's just continual, the synchronicities.
It is, but it's taken on a whole life of its own that I never saw coming, When I spoke with the first channeler way back, like 8 months ago, that George said that we were in the same soul group and that, I'm doing a good job documenting everything and, that we've been together in numerous lifetimes, but I never foresaw what would be happening at these events. So in February, I started doing these events, like 2 or 3 different cities each week. And I would notice that over the heads of the people, I would see these light beings, these souls that were loving, and they were in the shapes of humans, and they were over the heads of the people in the back of the room. And I was wondering, like, well, what is this? I'd never seen anything like that. And so George said that when people register to come to our events, they're not my events, they're our events. When people come to our events, George, from his higher viewpoint in heaven and from the elevated state of consciousness that he has, he can see all the people who are going to be coming to our events. And so he connects with their loved ones in heaven, and he brings their loved ones in heaven to the event. So while I do a guided meditation in the second half of the event, the people in the audience can reconnect with their loved ones in heaven. And every night that I did these events, every night that I did the guided meditation to tell people, the people who you loved while they're alive, they still love you from wherever they are in heaven. You know, that love never goes away.
Mm-hmm.
So open your heart, open your mind to the possibility of re-experiencing this love that you shared with this person now. And I would be playing my music, and, you know, I would play the music a little bit and then guide them a little bit further. And every single night that we did this, after the meditation was over, I would ask if anybody had any experiences. And every night there were 3 to 5 people sharing experiences. One woman said her husband died in 9/11 and she hadn't seen him since 9/11, and he came back to her. Another woman said that both of her parents died in a car accident when she was much younger. This woman was 60. And so there was so many things that she wanted to say to her parents that she never had the chance to say to them because they died unexpectedly.
Mm.
And both her mom and dad came to her, hugged her, and she was finally able to tell her mom and dad how much she loved them and what great parents they were to her, and, you know, how wonderful it was to see them again. I mean, this has become a normal thing in my life.
Wow. So it's
I mean, it's like, you know how, like, you every day you get up, you look in the mirror, you brush your teeth. You know what I mean? This is your normal day. Every time we do events, this is normal.
I got to tell you something very humorous about this. When I'm hearing you speak, and I really enjoyed your book. It's a great read because it's a narrative and it takes place over time, and so we all follow your story. I don't know if you realize, but Omni art is a art movement that was founded after pop art. And when I lived in New York, everything was about Andy Warhol. And I had all kinds of, synchronicities. In fact, I toasted him on New Year's Eve of 1986, standing next to him. And then he died, of course, in 1987, and then I founded Omni Art in 1988. So I'm not unfamiliar with this kind of thing. But what really makes me laugh is that when I was in San Francisco, I house sat for a friend who was out of town, and it turns out the house was, that's where Yoko Ono and John Lennon had stayed for quite a while they were recovering from drugs. And there was a poem of John Lennon written on the bathroom wall that was handwritten by him. And so I'm in this house, and I'm having all these like past this life experiences from the 1970s, because I was like, I'm a little bit older than you, but not much. And I had no connection to John Lennon. I mean, not really, other than the fact that he wrote one of the best songs ever written, Imagine. But I just think that's very interesting. And you're talking to me about George Harrison. And I almost feel like that whole era of, the 1960s, George Harrison, the Beatles, Andy Warhol, all this stuff's all interconnected. I mean, Yoko Ono did the eulogy at St. Patrick's Cathedral for Andy Warhol when he died, and I was there. And,
wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, and I was in the front row. I actually was told by the guy who was the fashion director of Interview magazine to go sit down on the right side of the church, because I got there, it was already packed. And the only row available was the very front row, and not being a Catholic, I had no idea. So I just sat down with my friend Millie, and we were the only ones in the entire front row. And, of course, that's reserved for family, which I found out later, which is really comical. But, yeah, and I remember my friend who was filming for MTV's 15 Minutes, Andy Warhol's 15 Minutes, in the bit behind me, he said that everybody was going, is that Andy Warhol's son?
Unreal.
It's just...
Well, I mean, John Lennon, he loved New York. And, in the 60s, who didn't do drugs back in the 60s?
Of course, that was just the way of life. It was the opening. It was, people getting out of their bodies, realizing their other dimensions, and, bringing that awareness in.
I have to say that, John really caught a bad rap for a lot of different things. And a lot of people don't realize how spiritual John was.
Oh.
I mean, everybody always gives the credit to George of, he was the spiritual one in the Beatles, But if you read John Lennon's lyrics, he he sings the ohm in some of his songs. I mean, he really was talking about deep things that were, were in some ways just as spiritual as what George was talking about or singing about.
And what's so magical is the music of the Beatles is so accessible by the average person. I mean, the melodies, the lyrics, and then it goes into this deeper awareness. But it's packaged in a way that's very natural. It's not like some esoteric music from India. It's packaged in sort of pop music, and it's just incredible. So I'm fascinated by this because your music, your instrumental music, which has really made you extremely well known, where you play the two recorders, it's beautiful stuff. I mean, it's very different than, say, the Beatles' music. But you say that George has also inspired you to depart that style and go into more more vocal music and writing songs. How has that affected you?
Well, have you ever said the word never?
I try to avoid it these days.
Yeah, because, never means it's just a matter of time. You see, before I started dating my stepdaughter, I was, living with this woman for 9 years. We broke up 9 days before the 9-year anniversary. I mean, it was a terrible thing, And I had made an album, a vocal album, that was like a positive, progressive rock album called Namaste. I made a couple of music videos that I put on YouTube. And, it was odd because somebody who did a review on the album said that it sounded like I was carrying the torch for George Harrison. And honestly, I knew that George was in the Beatles. He was friends with Eric Clapton. He had something to do with the concert for Bangladesh. But I had never listened to a George Harrison record in my life, And I thought that was odd. But, because that relationship was breaking up, I thought, I can't afford to spend $10,000 or $15,000 recording a vocal album that no one ever gets to hear because people, fortunately, love my flute music for meditation. You don't usually meditate to vocal music or pop music. And because of that, that's what, I sold 1 million CDs of my relaxing instrumental flute music.
Right.
And so I swore when I left Minneapolis and moved back east that I would never write another song with words again for the rest of my life because I figured if I didn't write any songs, then I wouldn't want to record them, and I wouldn't start spending money on things that I really needed to be more careful with my money about because it was 2010 and the economy was falling apart.
Right.
And then so I start dating, 5 months goes by, I start dating this woman, and, I really had strong feelings for her, and she tells me she grew up in George's castle in England, and I start writing these songs for her, and I wrote and recorded 25 songs for this woman in 30 days.
It's amazing.
And that was like pop music like the Beatles. It wasn't relaxing flute music. I mean, it was singing and drums and guitars and all kinds of, background vocals. And I was doing things in these recordings. I had no idea why I was doing these things. I was just using these unique techniques that I'd never tried. I don't know what was making me do them. And then the year after I did that recording, I was reading some book on how the Beatles did their recordings, and these crazy techniques that I was doing that the engineers were fighting me every inch of the way were the exact techniques that the Beatles used to record their guitars with back in the Beatles.
That's amazing.
They used to, normally an acoustic guitar, for the musicians out there, the best way to get a sound for an acoustic guitar is you put a microphone in front of it. And if there's a pickup in the acoustic guitar, you don't normally use that pickup sound because it never sounds as natural or as warm as the sound of a microphone in front of an acoustic guitar. What I was forcing the engineers to do was take the output from the acoustic guitar and put that cord into a Vox amplifier and make that Vox amplifier fill the room so that would also pick up into the microphone right in front of the guitar. Okay? That's exactly the way George and John Lennon recorded their guitars in the Beatles.
Remarkable.
Into a Vox amplifier, so this way the sound filled the room and went into the microphone in front of the guitar itself. That's not a normal thing to do. And, one of the things is that I would get these, I guess you could say, these inspirations or this inner guidance, or like it was a strong nudge to do things that were really not logical. And, eventually I would experience something and find out that this is something that George used to do.
So it's really, really gotten detailed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's this is. I could have never in a gazillion years imagined that I'd be living with this, because it's a wonderful thing now. Now I'm not in the dark anymore. I understand what this thing is about. Basically, besides the fact of George explaining some of the different past lives that we've had together, which blew my mind. But besides that, whatever the Beatles did had such an effect on people on this planet. There's such a love and an admiration for those four guys.
Yes.
And so when the Beatles changed haircuts, the world changed haircuts. At least 1 million people changed their haircut when they changed their haircut. And, with different things in their life, they got into different things, and the world followed it,
Mm-hmm.
And so George explained to me that, for thousands of years, if you look at the Aboriginal cultures all over the world, the Native American cultures, all of the people for thousands of years believed that whatever, that their ancestors were always with them, guiding and protecting them and helping them live a better life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another word for your ancestors is your grandparents or your parents, because they're the people who came before you.
Right.
It's only been in modern times that it became taboo to talk about being connected to your relatives, people who you loved while they were alive. Why do you think when we meet somebody, let's just say, women talk about this more than men talk about it. Like, they'll say, I met this girlfriend, and after 10 minutes, I felt like I'd known her my whole life, and we've been like sisters ever since.
Right.
How do you think that is? That's because you had a connection with that person. You had some kind of love, whether it was a friendship or a family or some kind of connection with that person. And it's so natural to be with them because you spent years with them in another lifetime. And so now you have that natural feeling just to show you that, there's love there. That love never goes away. And so we really can connect with the people who we love who have crossed over into that next dimension. We never stop. We never cease to exist. Anybody who's ever had a near-death experience, and all of the top books on the New York Times bestsellers list are all about proof of heaven. And so George is using this experience because he's being directed from the source to connect with me, so this way he can help prove to mankind that there is life after this life.
What about reincarnation? Do you think, how does that play into this? Because you're talking about, sort of this communication from the soul from another dimension or a heaven. What about re-entering into the physical? Can you conduct a life from the physical as well as operate in your prior life in the other dimensions?
Well, as far as what I understand about this, when we have spiritual enlightenment, we don't have to reincarnate anymore. Okay? Because reincarnation is basically, from what I've learned, it gives each soul an opportunity to learn about the positive and the negative effects from our actions. There are some people who say, there's no such thing as good karma. There's no such thing as bad karma. There's no such thing as karma. So what I say to that, I said, okay, well, then let's say we have enjoyable repercussions for our actions, like when we do something good for somebody, something enjoyable comes back to us, or we have unenjoyable repercussions from our actions because we've done something that hurt somebody else. So it's hard for them to argue with that one, But when we have enlightenment, then we don't have to come back anymore. Because I guess there's, God or the source can use us in heaven to help all the souls in heaven. And it's like, from what I understand, you earn the right not to have to reincarnate again. And does that answer the question, Walter?
Well, it does. I think that there's a lot of things that aren't very well explained by personal experience. I mean, we have experiences of all kinds of remarkable consciousness-based and really dimensional-based, physics is the way I look at it. It's kind of a story of physics. But I don't know if I agree with you. The reincarnation is about, life lessons intersecting between different incarnations. Finally, you get to the point where you don't really need to have a physical body here to learn them because you've learned them. So that makes complete sense to me. You also talked about a blue star appearing in the room during one of your channeling sessions when George was there, and I thought that was really an interesting thing because there's a thing called the Hopi blue star. The Hopis had it as well, and you said it was George, but did you consider that possibly it was George along with perhaps another state of consciousness that was there assisting the communication?
Well, once I connected with Bob Murray and I was able to communicate with George and have wonderful, deep, long conversations, he explained this to me. That wasn't connected to the Hopi blue star. It was basically, I was familiar with the blue star in my life because of my spiritual studies, for 27 years when the experience first started. Mm-hmm. And he knew I was comfortable being associated with a blue star. And so that's why he appeared to me as that blue star, because that was something that I trusted. Mm-hmm. And, when we think back to people from the 60s or 70s or 80s, whatever, we think back to them when they were in their 20s, or 30s, Mm-hmm. But none of us are the same spiritual beings now at 50 or 60 or 70 as we were in our 20s or 30s.
Right.
So because we have an image of, the Beatles in the 60s with the haircuts and the suits, and then, to watch them evolve into hippies, because that was the way people looked at the time, that was normal, Mm-hmm. It's difficult to have that image in your head already and then have 30 years go by and George spending that 30 years developing his spirituality and meditating and doing yoga and doing everything he could to help bring mankind forward in its understanding of spirituality and becoming more spiritual himself to when he actually had the Enlightenment. We look at it's such a unique thing when we think about religions and the way we are spoon-fed religions or force-fed religions, depending on how you look at it, when we think of the different people who these religions were made from their life, like, Jesus to Christianity and Buddha and Buddhism, for example, Mm-hmm. It's hard to... We've been spoon-fed the thing that there's only one, that there's only one person who lived and supposedly, died for your sins, and there's only one prophet of God,
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know what I mean? Like the way Jesus was the prophet for Christianity, let's say, and Buddha was the prophet for Buddhism. But these states of consciousness are not out of our reach. We've been taught that they're out of our reach because, people, you can sell more books if you can say, hey, you know what, this is the only way. And if you don't go this way, you're going to have a eternity in hell and damnation. That's a pretty hard sell,
Mm-hmm.
But from what I have experienced and from what George has shared with me, and I'm going to say that again, from what George has shared with me and the people he's introduced me to and connected me with, that concept of there being only one way to God is not true. It just isn't. There are different religions and there are different languages on this planet. And how fair would it be for wonderful people who grew up in China, for example, who didn't speak English? How fair would it be the only way to God was if you read English? You know what I mean? If the teacher or the master of that teaching, like the way Jesus was the master of his teachings, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
How fair would it be for all the good people in China who don't speak English back in that time? There are spiritually advanced people who have made it their mission in life to unfold to the greatest capacity that they could so they could achieve their spiritual potential. And so when we departmentalize, we separate, well, it's either Buddhism or Christianity. Which one are you going to choose, But, I mean, there's truth in both of those religions and in all the different paths on the planet. And there's a reason why there's all this different languages that truth isn't spoken in. It's because it's meant for good people who want to advance spiritually. It doesn't matter. It's not limited to one religion. And I think that, he's made that so clear to me. There's no way he could make that any clearer to me,
Well, it's pretty clear that, people who are into power and control will use whatever means is available to them to exert that control. So, the Roman Empire really rose or had declined to quite a great extent when Christianity kind of started to take off back in the early centuries. And so at the Council of Nicaea with Constantine, they sort of appropriated the religion and made it part of the eulogy of the Roman Empire. And when you understand how things have been manipulated by various entities and groups and institutions, and then you go back to the original spiritual teachings of the founders of those religions, you'll find that actually they're very universal. Yeah,
I've been saying that for years. I agree with you. I mean, the three things is there is a God that created everything, let's call it the creator, and there is this great spirit that flows out of the creator that, makes all things possible, keeps the world turning,
Mm-hmm.
and there's one person who shared their experiences with it and wanted to tell everybody that you can do this too. You can have this. There's what I can do, you can do also. I mean, we all are the Buddha inside of us. We all have that potential. We all have that light inside of us. There's all of these teachings, the original teachings, if there was a way to actually go back in time and experience that, I'm sure that all of these guys were saying pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, and I think it's contexted for different cultures and different races and different areas of the world.
Sure.
But, we're in the space age, which has really helped everyone see the planet is more unified. When they took that photograph of Earth from space on one of the moon missions, it transformed the consciousness of the human race to realize we're on this spaceship Earth floating in the middle of, this vast emptiness. And it helped people realize that we're all of the same source. I believe that was a shift that happened. And so now we're working with all kinds of other layers coming in. And I see the 1960s and the explosion that the Beatles were part of consciousness and awareness has continually been evolving ever since then. It didn't just happen and ended. We're actually living a completely new octave of that same awareness coming in. And you see it in all the books, you see it in films. There's more information like what you're talking about, channeling and past lives and Mikiko Kaku at City University in New York talks about the multiverse, and this is seriously spoken about with physicists. It's not this crazy out of this world thing any longer. It's really pretty much a part of our culture that's unfolding. So,
I agree with you. And there's another way that you could look at the Mayan calendar. A lot of people thought, well, that was the end of the world, that was predicted. But, some people thought that the guy just ran out of room at the bottom of the corner. But, that's a joke, of course. But No, the other thing that I've been told, and what I really believe, is that it was the end of an era. It was the end of an age, because this whole new thought, the new spiritual way that people are looking at life, especially the young people, the people 18 to 25 years old, these people, they're not afraid of thinking about, any of this spiritual stuff, like, being in contact with your grandparents, meditating. I mean, there are 20 million Americans now doing yoga in America.
Right.
20 million. And every yoga session starts and ends with a meditation.
Yep.
All of this stuff, the whole belief system that was established for, let's say, the last 1,000 or 2,000 years, I mean, it used to be accepted by almost everybody. But it's amazing. Like, when I do these events, and for lack of a better word, they're called David Young channeling George Harrison events. I mean, I never sit in front of the audience and say, "Oh, George is telling me to tell you guys this or tell you guys that." I mean, I don't ever do that. I share the synchronicities and the miracles and how it shows that George is still alive in a different form, and he's helping me, and he's showing people that there is a life after this life, and this is a new state of consciousness for people, because people have been so used to being, oh my God, you can't talk about certain spiritual things. You can't talk about life after this life. You notice I don't call it life after death. I call it life after this life, because isn't that a lot friendlier sounding?
That's more accurate too, I think.
Yeah.